Yeah, it is on. Can you hear me? Well, welcome, and I'm so proud to be here. I don't come up to Oxford quite as much. I live out in Philadelphia, which is about a couple of hours down the road. But thank you for having us. It was a really good trip coming up, and we had an opportunity to go to Roanoke. I've never been there before. I loved it, though. I loved it. Again, my name is Rae Nell Vaughn, and I am one of the co-authors of Choctaw Tales. I live in Philadelphia. I have 3 daughters and 6 grandchildren, 1 grandson and 5 granddaughters, all under the age of 8. So they do keep me busy, very busy. I'm going to go ahead and take this off because I can feel it dropping. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do that. And it's a little bit easier for me to talk and hold the mic. But so I want to talk a little bit about the book and how we got here, a little bit of that backstory on it. Back in 1995, 96, in that area, I served as the tribal archivist for the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, and inside the archives was a wealth of information. We had received our very first collection from John Peterson's family, who was a professor out at Mississippi State. And those papers dealt more so with economics of the tribe, things of that sort. He worked closely with the tribe for a period of time, and so we had the good fortune to receive that as one of our first collections in the archives. And then other smaller collections began making their way in, and I saw a lot of information that was in the archives. And one of the things that we captured were of the Choctaw stories. These stories were produced under a grant at some point in the early 70s, and that's where the Shukanupa came from. And so I saw these things and I said, well, these are great, and what can we do to enhance this collection, number one. Number two, how do we promote the collection? And so here comes this young grad student into the archives.
That's a long time ago.
Long time ago, 1995, 96. And we start talking, and I say, hey, you know, these are the things I'm looking at, and this is what I'm wanting to do, is to capture our history, our life ways, and our culture, and put it in a format that can be utilized not only within our tribal schools, but also for the public, and even within the public schools, to teach people of Mississippi and our neighbors outside of the state who the only tribe in this state of who they are. And that's sort of the backstory of how we got here with Choctaw Tales and Choctaw Traditions. And it's really been an education and the passion of the people that we've talked throughout the years. Now, we started working on this in the late 90s for the most part. And these are individuals, tribal members that I know growing up, elders that I've grown up with, people who were around my mother's age. I knew these people and the stories they would share with us, things that they learned. Now, each family and each community have different types of storytelling, in the sense of what their stories are, beliefs and traditions, but for the most part, they're all very similar. Again, it's always who is the storyteller and what story are they telling? And so it was quite an education for all of us as we went through this process of collecting these stories. We had the good fortune, as we started with the first books, of being able to work with young students under a program called the Youth Opportunity Program that provided employment, career exploration for high school students. And so we were able to get 4 students, And we took them in partners, and off we went to go do interviews throughout the reservation. And they too had an appreciation of the things that they were hearing, some things they'd never heard before, and didn't understand certain parts of our custom, I guess, so to speak. And for them, it also was an awakening of sorts. And so we did a lot of groundwork for us to get where we are today. Storytelling is fascinating. I'll quote my uncle, my late uncle, Hewlin Willis. He's one of 4 uncles, my mother's brothers. And I always say, they're all my favorite, but he's one of my favorites. And he and Tom were talking one day. They pulled up into his carport, where a lot of things happen in the carport, a lot of dinners, a lot of sitting back and having a drink and talking, and sweet tea, of course. Of course, right, Tom?
Silent. This is going on the internet, Rae. Come on.
And they pull up a chair and sat down, and Tom explained what he was doing and what we were working on. And he said, well, you know what? I'm not a storyteller, but I can tell you a story. So I say that to say that, some of us are not storytellers in the sense, but we have stories to share from growing up, from things that we've encountered in our life, also the things that we have been taught, our customs, our ceremonies, our cultures. And it's almost like that story of, why do you bake the bread in a small pan? Because that's how it was always done. But it was because the oven was small, and that's why you did that. And so it's understanding why we do what we do. And most of it in our ceremonies is honoring, is what we're doing. We're honoring the event, the person, the family, depending on what that situation may be. It may be a wedding ceremony, it may be a funeral ceremony, which will be more so involved in traditions, the book that we also have here. In Tales, we talk a lot about the tall tales, the supernatural, for those of you who have seen Sinners. And one of the authors for Traditions was in the movie Sinners, so we've really had a good time with that. But there's a lot of great stories to share and to talk about. So Tom, before I take up our 25, 30 minutes.
You are the star of the show. That is perfectly acceptable. But I'll just riff a little bit off of what Rae Nell said. You started by saying you're so proud to be here, as am I, just in terms of fieldwork for anthropologists historically has not been great. We have a track record that is not something we herald necessarily up through the 20th century. But happily, ethics became a much more prominent part of the work that we do. And it became clear by the time I hit grad school that any project that we undertake with a group outside of our own should be collaborative. And so I just couldn't imagine, and I've done work with Latter-day Saints, I've done work on public assistance stories and with public aid providers and aid recipients. I've done work in a range of different areas and groups. But Rae has been the collaborator of all collaborators. I think we shared a mind, honestly, when we first met about kind of what these books might look like. These books exist because of Rae. I came down as a grad student really interested in Native American narrative. Didn't know much. I think the U.S. education system doesn't really prepare us particularly well for even understanding or how to approach Native culture beyond this kind of romantic, stereotypical past. And so part of the goal of these books was to sort of remind folks, hey, still here and, doing great, actually. And so it's been a treat and a pleasure to be able to work with somebody where we were so simpatico. Rae mentioned the YOP, the students. Something that was important to me as a folklorist theoretically, and this is going to sound boring as all get out, but is that when you hear an oral tradition, right, it's different from a written tradition. And so it's got power in the moment and the context. And this is happening when I was coming down at a moment in both anthropology and folklore where context became kind of king. And so this YOP thing, having students come with us when we went out and interviewed elders, was sort of, it was really just me as kind of a way of saying, like, hey, we gotta entertain these kids somehow, right? Like Rae had 4 of them batting around an archive. I said, they can come with me and they can introduce me to their grandmas because, I need some people to talk to. And what ultimately happened was they started telling stories not to me, but to their grandchildren, which is exactly the context of how these stories were shared. So honestly, my favorite story that's new, so Choctaw Tales is the 2nd edition, Choctaw Traditions is the 1st edition, but we added 50 new stories to Choctaw Tales, and one of them is from Rae, and it's her telling her grandkids the story of Funny Lusa and why, all about the sort of the black squirrel that eats the sun and explains the solar eclipse, and maybe we can get her to tell that story in just a bit. But you hear the kids responding, and you hear how Rae responds to them, and the story comes to life. And so our goal in these was to capture the voices of the elders, not to sort of sanitize them, not to put them in summary form, but to actually, word for word, here's how the stories were told. Sometimes that means translating verbal to written can be tricky, and so there are notes in the back for those of you who are like, what did they mean by X, Y, or Z? We didn't want to clutter the story right there on the page, but we wanted to give you some guidance in the back to kind of help guide you along. So I think maybe one of the things that excites me the most about these books is just knowing that those elders were talking to their grandkids, were telling stories in the way that for centuries had been told.
Also, you have a section in there that's totally in Choctaw, in the Choctaw language, because we did have some elders there that were participating with us that spoke only in the Choctaw language. And we were so grateful Tom incorporated that as well to have it written down. And that was not an easy process. As much as we love Tom and he's just about as close as a family member can be, he's not Choctaw.
Shocker.
And fortunately, he was able to work with our Choctaw language program and other individuals to help him with the translation of it.
Right. That was the kindest way you could possibly have said that. I had no hand in the translation whatsoever, other than standing there and sort of like, as we talked through, because it was useful for them to have an interlocutor or just somebody to bounce ideas off me and say, hey, this is what I think they're saying. Does this make sense in the context of? And I, by that point, had known enough about different stories and storytelling traditions, and I said, oh no, that's Makila. That's how the elders always end their stories when they're telling these kind of mythic tales. And they're like, thank you, sorry. Say the pronunciation, it's better than
Makila, that's it.
Yeah.
We're done. The end. Basically, the end.
Yeah. I think that was her message also to me. So please, back to you.
So,
well,
I think. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
One thing we thought we would do is just explain a little bit about the difference between the two books, so you have kind of a sense, because we are super pumped to take your questions and kind of actually have a conversation with you all as well, or kind of what's interesting to you. Choctaw Tales, so 2nd edition. Rae really set it up nicely, but these really are what we might call tribal stories. So these are the myths, the legends. Rae, you mentioned Shukanumpa.
Shukanumpa, which are the animal stories, the rabbit and the turtle and the possum, the raccoon, the snake.
So you'd recognize many of these stories, but what I love about Choctaw storytelling, this is something we spend a lot of time on, is to understand the structure behind all of the stories. And so Shukanumpa means hog talk or hogwash. And so, these stories of these animals, right, they're always doing ridiculous things. Aesop probably well enough to kind of gloss some of these, but then there are some very Choctaw-specific stories in here as well. But there's a lot of sharing, right? Choctaw were working side by side with white folks, with black folks, and so, the Brer Rabbit stories that you would know, there's a lot of intermingling, and you're going to see some recognition or some similarities in these stories. But Shukanumpa also includes the tall tales. It includes just funny anecdotes that happened at work the other day. And so for a Western kind of audience, we're like, no, those are tall tales and these are animal tales and those are different genres, not for the Choctaw. So the fact that they have one term that brings both of those together intellectually is really interesting. Like what's the core then for us to understand these two, what seemingly, at least to me initially, two very different types of stories? What does that mean when it's just all under one rubric? And your tall tale, your humorous anecdote, it's all about human foible, all of it. And what we can learn from watching sort of the kind of mistakes of animals or Ashman, Jim Dixon, some of these great sort of tall tale tellers. And then also prophecies. So while the Choctaw are thinking very much about their past and how to stay grounded in their past, prophecies about thinking about, hey, what's coming down the pike? How do we use our traditional knowledge to make sure that we don't make mistakes moving forward? Is that a fair assessment of this one?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say so.
And I'll be brief on this one so that Rae can get back to saying far more interesting things. But Choctaw Traditions then, I mentioned earlier that kind of stereotype that we often have of Native peoples. They're from the past, they're sort of romantic. They're all legends.
We don't live in teepees, and I don't have feathers in my hair.
And never did.
Never did.
Yeah, so that's the other big piece. But Choctaw folks tell stories around the family dinner table also. They also tell stories at the office. They also tell stories with their grandkids when they're trying to scare them enough to get out of the woods because, they're snakes, not just Bopoli or Nalosachito or some of these other figures. So this book hopefully humanizes the Choctaw in ways that sometimes maybe the legends and myths may not. Both books, however, start with anywhere from 75 to 100 pages worth of photos and biographies of the people who tell the stories. So he wanted to center both of these books very much on people. So when you read a story, you can say, I want to know a little bit more about that person. Go right to the front. You'll find them right there.
And expanding a little bit on that, which I think is very important, is the fact that these collections are with the tribe. The voices of the individuals telling the story. So when my great-grandchildren or my grandchildren want to hear my voice or to see me, as I can go and hear my grandmother's voice and I can see her telling the story, they'll have that opportunity. It'll be there as a memorial for all of our storytellers. And sadly, we started this back in the late 90s. We've lost many of our storytellers. We lost a lot of people during COVID, so it was a very, very difficult time. And even in those instances, there will be stories to be shared of the dark times, just as there were when the tribe was impacted by the Spanish flu in the early 19th century, where the same thing happened. It was a very tremendous hit to the tribe. And so being able to go back and to listen as a family, I think is just the most precious thing and the best way to honor and dedicate those individuals for the works that they have provided. And they may think, well, I was just telling a story, but it has so much meaning behind it. As Tom said, it's not only telling the story. In some stories, it's what's the moral of the story. There's a story I do want to share when we talked about Bopuli. My mother was born in 1944. She was maybe about 2 or 3 years old. She's the oldest of 11 children. And just to give you a picture of where we are, rural Neshoba County, my grandparents lived in a 4-roomed frame house, kitchen, a place where the fireplace is, 1 bedroom and another bedroom. And up the road was my uncle, my great uncle, my grandfather's brother, and further up the road, not too far, was my great grandmother, my grandfather's mother. And so we were very close physically in that neighborhood, which was really just a red dirt road. And so they were out that day doing what they normally do, normal chores, just the day-to-day work of being in a home and gardening and things of that sort. Well, at some point in time, someone recognized that my mother Caroline was not about. And they began looking, they began searching. The home was bumped up against the tree line of the forest. And so everyone was out searching. Everyone came down to help the family search, my grandfather and grandmother, to search for my mother Caroline. Where is she? There's the woods and so many things in the woods, as we know. There was a creek that also flowed by the home down in the woods, a creek that I used to go and swim in, and I can't believe I did because I had no fear of snakes, I guess, at that time, but we just jumped feet first, but that's a story for another time. And so they continued to look and look. They searched different places. There was an area down the hill from where my grandparents' home was, where they would go to an artesian well and get the water, and it had a lot of hills and things where things could happen to a small child. And they looked and they looked, and finally, at some point in time, after all of this searching, they circled back around and went back at the place where they started to look. And as they came into the woods, there she was, sitting atop of this fallen tree, a very large tree that you couldn't see. You couldn't see how a child that small could climb up onto the log and be sitting there. And so what my grandmother said was that Bupuli, the little people, had taken her, because the little people have a number of functions, so to speak, where one, they give an individual the medicine, the Choctaw medicine, to be what they call a Choctaw doctor or chatalikji. And secondly, for the adults, they like to be mischievous and mess with you, knock on the wood, throw rocks at the house. That's Populi out there. And so they found her. She was fine. But what had happened was she had gotten selected to receive what they thought she would receive medicine, but she wasn't given the medicine, the power to use the medicine. And so there was a question in one of our other formats about, well, what happens when it does happen? Well, we don't know, because that's something that only that medicine person would know. And rightfully so. It's something that you're given and you need to protect. And so that's something that happened to her. So that was 44. She was probably 1947, 48 when that happened. There's other stories as well. We talked about Funny Losa and the sun. And I'm trying to think when that eclipse happened. It was like a couple of years ago when, because it's going to happen last spring, I think. Yeah. When we were in the path of the eclipse, because it'll happen again in 2045. That's what I remember. And I was flipping through, like everyone else, social media, and I saw this Choctaw story from Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, who are essentially our brothers and sisters, because those are the tribal members who walked the Trail of Tears up into what was known as Indian Territory in Oklahoma. Oklahoma being a Choctaw word, Okla meaning people, Humma meaning red. And I just lost my thought.
Oh, Funny Losa.
Funny Losa. You know how that goes. Because let me tell you, in my mind, I was seeing it as I was talking. And so they shared the story of Funny Losa and the sun. And I just thought it was the greatest story. as to how to explain what this is as a tribal person, and understanding what the symbolism of it was. And I thought, I'm going to tell my kids, because my grandkids, because we're constantly, Tom is basically a fixture with our family. And so he has always been a part of family meals and family gatherings, and that's where a lot of the good stories come out. I don't know what it is about breaking bread and talking, but we always just had a great time, and we celebrate a lot of different things. So there was constantly, especially during the time when Tom was there, it's like we were eating maybe every other weekend or something, gathering together to eat. And so I just thought that the Funny Lusa story would be a great story to share with my grandchildren. So it was a beautiful spring day in April. The weather was just warming up. It was just great to get into the pool, and not that hot, not that cool. It was just right. And so we were out. I'd gotten all of the blow up things, the slide and the little pools out and everything. And we were out playing in the water. It was just a really great day. And as grandmas know, sometimes you've got all the grandkids and the mamas are nowhere to be seen. So I'm like corralling cats out there. And so I said, come on, guys, come on, kids. I'm going to paraphrase my story, because that's what we do when we tell stories. And so they all came around. I said, I want to tell you a story. And I talked with them about the eclipse that had happened. I said, but I want to tell you this story about Funny Lusa and the sun. And it was a great exchange between me and my grandson. And my grandson is the oldest of my grandchildren. He's now 8. He was 7 at the time, and the others are younger. And so we talked about Funny Lusa and the sun, and how Funny Lusa jumped up to the sun, and he's Funny Lusa, funny being squirrel and Lusa meaning black. And so what he did when he jumped up on the sun was to create that shadow, and he was wanting to eat the sun. And the people said, Funny Lusa, get down. What are you doing? Get down. We need the sun to warm our bodies and to help our crops grow. Get down, get down. And he would not. And he just kept trying to chomp at the sun. And finally the people said, Funny Lusa, get down. They grabbed their pots and pans and they made all kind of noise. Boom, 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 tuck, 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 tuck. Get down, get down. And what happened then, Avery said. Well, they kept telling me, get down, get down. And then eventually, Funny Lusa, I'm giving you the short version. I want you to read the book. Came down. And as I was sharing that story, now that's not the full story, you will have to read the book. I told the kids, I said, in 2045, this eclipse will happen again. And I spoke directly to Avery, and I said, Avery, if I'm here, I will tell this story again. But if I'm not here, you will have to tell the kids this story in 2045 when it happens again. He said, okay. But I'm sure he was wondering, well, where are you going to be, Grammy? Where are you going to be?
The conversation turned dark.
And so it was a wonderful exchange, and I love my grandbabies to death. And I said, okay, it's time to go eat some pizza, because we were ready for lunch. We'd been out there for most of the morning and part of noon, and we broke for lunch, and I told them I loved them, and they all said they loved me. And so it's that bonding and sharing and learning and asking questions. When their grandfather passed away, it was a really hard time for them. Even as small children, they were very close. Our family lives very close to one another, even with my family. My daughter lives down the hill from me in our neighborhood. We're in the same neighborhood. I have another daughter that lives in a different neighborhood, maybe about 10 minutes away from me. And then I have my other daughter who lives about maybe 10 minutes away from where I live. So we're all still very close knit. And at the end of their grandfather's life, he was very ill, and so they were very close with him at that time. He was home for the majority of the end of his life, and got to became a very close relationship. And so it was very hard on them when he passed. And so we talked about, he's still here with us, and I said, you see that really bright star up there? And they said, yeah. And I said, that's Afu meaning grandfather. He's always up there. He's always up there in the sky with us, and he's always watching over us. And death as a part of our ceremonies is a very complex process for us. So as the wedding ceremonies and all the different ceremonies, the happy times and the bad times. And it's important, and these are almost rites of passage for the children of the tribe to learn and understand about life and death and happiness and sadness. And so I know I've kind of gone a little too long, but I wanted to go ahead and I know we need to ask if there's any questions.
Yeah, some questions. And I'll point out that when Rae told those stories, there was so much, we'll call it ethnographic data. You learned so much about what life was like and getting the water, and about life and death, and about children. And that's these stories in here. So they're family stories, but you're learning about the customs and traditions, funerals, etc. So yeah, I think please, let's turn it over to your questions. Yeah.
I'm an English teacher, and I was wondering if you had any advice or suggestions about teachers who are like looking to bring these stories into the classroom, and like how to set them up to students. I would love insight.
That's a good question.
It is. I'll take the first quick crack, which is there's some really interesting literature. So I teach about some of these kinds of things. And there was I don't know what grade you're teaching.
11th, 12th, high school.
Okay, so this was much younger, so we'll have to kind of adapt. But they were teaching sort of like 3rd and 4th grade, and they brought in all the kind of classic Cinderella, Grimm's, all these fairy tales, and the students did not respond at all. And many of the kids, this was a lower income area and school. And then they brought in stories from African traditions, but from native traditions in the local area. And the students lit up. And part of it was because they weren't so neatly tied up in bows. You know, Cinderella didn't get the prince always. They were a little more complicated. And that's what life is like for kids. And so, one, trust them to handle complicated stories. At 11th and 12th, you can definitely trust them. I would just go back to the context piece is let them experience the story first. Just, you know, and then have the conversation, say, what do you need to know? What do you want to know to really understand this story? Because they will be confused by a lot. I mean, I teach at a college, and they are confused by every one of the stories in here first. But then they read the context, and then they read some of the background. So I would say let them experience it as literature first, and then give some context.
So one of the things that would be available to you from the tribes, from a tribal perspective, is utilizing the Chataimi Museum and Archives. They have a wealth of resources that would be available to you. One of the things that we hope to do at some point, which we're working to collaborate with Chataimi Cultural Center as well as hopefully with the school, is the development of curriculum that would incorporate the things that you're talking about in the different, in science, in reading, in English. That way you are able to utilize all aspects of those areas using these types of resources. If you know a good curriculum specialist that we could recommend.
100%.
Yeah, and that's going to be the key. That will be the key. And like anything else, you know, funding is funding. And where you can get it, you can get it. But I would suggest you can always go to choctaw.org, and there's a directory, there's information, and you can make contact with the staff there. And I'm sure they'll be very happy to help you. Also, if anyone is wanting to, say, have some sort of presentation, dance group, someone to come and talk about specifics, the Office of Public Information is available through the tribe. You just send in a request. This is when, we're wanting to have this presentation, and this is the things I'm looking for. They can help you in creating the kind of product that you want to present.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And honestly, just tmould@rollins.edu. Like really, you can just reach right out. I've got a lot of this stuff prepped, and the more, we really do want to expand that, but one-on-one, 100%. tmould@rollins.edu. Anybody? Other questions? Please.
I've never been to Philadelphia. Do y'all have a museum there with the Choctaw Indians?
Yes, there is a museum, the Choctaw Cultural Center and Archives. The museum is inside the Cultural Center. There's also a gift shop. There's a training room, conference room type area. We just had our Choctaw Indian Fair in the early part of this month. This was our 75th anniversary, the diamond anniversary of this fair. It's 5 days of entertainment, cultural expression, dance, social dances, watching someone weave a basket, hearing the stories, playing Choctaw games, tribal games like Chunky and some of the other games.
Washers,
A lot of games. It's a really great time to come out and hear the Choctaw language being spoken throughout. We've had a documentary that was completed regarding one of our star athletes. It's called Carly Buckets. She played basketball for the University of Arkansas Razorbacks, and that is now making its way through the film festival circuit at the moment. And so something to look forward to. I missed it. There was so much going on because of the anniversary. They had so many different events going on. We had over maybe 25 young people who have received athletic scholarships that were pursuing their sport at the collegiate level. We had a signing ceremony for them to have people come up. There was a large poster with all of the individuals on there. And so there were kids wrapped around that area just trying to get a picture with them or to get them to sign the poster and everything. It was great. I missed that one too. But it's just a time for, and the basis of it all was for tribal members to come together, see family they haven't seen, share produce, share gatherings, break bread together, continue to play the traditional game of stickball. Just a time for us to reconnect and recharge and to start anew again. We'll have another tribal event in August, which will be Naniwaya Day, where there will be an honoring ceremony, an annual honoring ceremony for Naniwaya Mound, which is our mother mound, and that's where our immersion stories and our origin stories come from.
Is that open to the public?
That will be open to the public, I believe. And so they talk about the history of the mound, and there's a presentation for the mound from each of the communities. It's a really moving ceremony. And so that's, in a nutshell. And of course, come to the museum. We also have a water park. We're getting to the end of the season, so they'll be open up only on Saturdays in August. Geyser Falls Water Park in Clearwater Key. Just a lot of things that are going on. We're in the process of building a new high school. It should be open, I think, the school year of it's either 26-27 or 27-28. I'm not quite sure. It's a very large campus, which is going to house the middle school and the high school. the existing campus, the buildings date back to 1963. And so it's time, the population has grown and it's over capacity and population, so they do need the space. So there's just a lot of great things to come out and see and do, aside from the casino. But do come out. I invite all of you to come out and take time to visit. The fair would have been the best opportunity though, because it would be all in one, inclusive of everything that cultural wise you would have been able to see.
I know we're running really tight on time. I think we're going to do a book signing here, which means we're going to hang around for longer. If anybody had one last question for the group, yeah, please.
Are the kids being taught your traditional arts and crafts?
Yes, they are. Some through the school and some through Boys and Girls Club, through the different programs that are geared for students.
Megan's work.
Through the CAP program, and I can't think of what the acronym is, CAP, C-A-P. I'll think of it after I leave the stage. My daughter works with that program, and they provide workshops throughout the month to each of the communities, be it dressmaking, beadwork, like the earrings I'm wearing today. This is a beautiful set of earrings that I had commissioned by Carlita Gibson, who is a young tribal artisan. It's like she was in her early 20s, and the craftsmanship of it for someone that young is really good. I mean, she did a really good job. Beadwork, they do stickball sticks, they do that. Cooking, traditional cooking outside on the open fire. So there's a lot of opportunities within the school and also for the adults. And it's almost like the train the trainer. You've got some that are very skilled, some that are learning, and they help each other in accomplishing whatever the project may be. So it's a lot of great things. Now, my grandmother, being a mother of 11 children, you know, she had to be the one to, there was no seamstress she could go to and say, hey, I'd like you to make a Choctaw dress for me. She did the Choctaw dresses, she did the Choctaw shirts, she did the beadwork. She was all in one, very artsy craftsy. And so very, very much an artisan, I should say. And well, Rae, why don't you bead? I'm like, you know, God blesses us with our talents. It missed me. Even my mother could bead, but no, I didn't get it. But my daughter, my oldest daughter, Hillary Megan, she's the one, and both her and my middle daughter, Molly, they are very much into the beadwork, the dressmaking. They're learning all those things. And what amazes me is with that ability, the artistic ability to pick up and see patterns and to be able to figure out how to do these things just amazes me, because I'm telling you, I don't have that skill. I honestly don't. And so I guess my skill is just telling the stories, you think?
Not just. It's pretty impressive.
But yeah, we're working diligently to preserve the culture, the life ways and traditions of the tribe. And it's just one tribal member at a time and how we all contribute to it. Any other questions?
Thank you both so much.
Oh, we have one more question.
How have the books been received by the members of the Choctaw?
Oh my, we had a group come out, tribal members came out when we were in Jackson at the bookstore there. We did some book signings during the Choctaw Fair. We got to talk with a lot of people about it. Very receptive because they have family members in there. And so it's just been really awesome to see and well received. Tom presented the books to the chief today, took it down to his office and presented signed books. We were fortunate at the very beginning to have the blessing of the late Philip Martin, tribal chief of the tribe. I believe he had 8 terms. He was a long running sitting chief and did a lot for the tribe. And he knew, his charge was to try to bring the tribe up from poverty and use different types of economic development engines in the automotive industry and then into the gaming industry. And we presented this to him, to the tribal council and to the tribal chief. And at that time, everyone was on board, and they continue to be on board with it because this book, The Choctaw Traditions, also went through the same process with the council and with the chief, with their blessing, and they moved forward with it. So the tribe is very much in line with the work that we're doing. And our work, monetary or otherwise, all returns back to the tribe, because this is not my book and this is not Tom's book, but it's the tribe's book. It's about the tribe, and it's the tribe's book. And so, I feel like in order for us to do the things that we want to see happen at the tribe, for example, with the cultural center and things of that sort, we wanted to make sure that we give back. So I'd like to see it hit the bestsellers list, and cha-ching, we'd like to really be able to present a nice check to the tribe. So with that, any other questions?
No, I thought it was perfect for the book sign, because every book that you buy goes right to the folks who are teaching the language and the arts and the questions that you're. So how's that for? I think we were talking earlier about like there should be no guilt, or we're putting guilt on you. Get some books. I'm kidding, but we are. I think going to shift over and just want to thank Richard and Jude so much for having us here. What a phenomenal. I mean, y'all know this is such a special bookstore. I didn't. And I mentioned it to some people in Florida and then in Mississippi, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's like one of the best independent bookstores in the country. I'm like, what? So we're very honored to be here. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.